user. My name is John Ripple, and I am a Canton SCORE volunteer. Some of you may be joining this series for the first time, so I'd like to do a little introduction about SCORE for those that are not familiar. SCORE is a nonprofit that has been around since 1964 and is a resource partner for the Small Business Administration, commonly known as SBA. SCORE has helped more than 17 million entrepreneurs start, grow, or successfully exit a business. SCORE's mission is to foster vibrant small business communities through mentoring as well as education. There are over 240 chapters across the United States with over 10,000 volunteers. SCORE offers counseling that is free of charge and confidential to both for-profit and nonprofit businesses, as well as host workshops and webinars like the one today. So please reach out to your local SCORE chapter. On the screen is the contact information for the Canton, Ohio SCORE chapter. Several housekeeping items before we get started. If you do have a question, it would be appreciated if you can type your question in the Q&A tab and minimize, if you would, asking questions in the chat tab. You can use chat to communicate against between each of the people that are attending the webinar. It helps to monitor the questions if you can put your question in the Q&A tab. So that would be greatly appreciated. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be receiving a link to this recording so you can review the webinar at a later time. With that, let's get started. Today's presenter is Ann Sharp. Ann presented last week, and this will be the second in a series of 4 that Ann is helping us educate us on QuickBooks. So Ann, the platform is yours.
Hi guys, I'm Ann. I'm the owner and founder of Excellent Admin. What I do is bookkeeping, payroll, taxes, and obviously a lot of QuickBooks training. So today we're going to elaborate on what we covered last Thursday by implementing all those things, all the tools, all the customization features and everything, and then leveling on to them by utilizing what we did last week to continue learning more pieces of QuickBooks. Today we're going to talk about couple different areas. So the first thing we're going to talk about reconciling. This plays into your bank account and credit cards and loans. And obviously we have done some categorization. So we'll do a couple more categorizations to review that last time. Obviously that plays into the manual entry feature as well. And then we'll reconcile, which is going to use it, take whatever's in QuickBooks and make sure it ties to what actually cleared the bank. Things that you'll be looking for are typos, dollar amounts. A lot of times I see where checks cleared for the wrong dollar amount. It could be that it was they didn't write like 2,525 on the line. They wrote 2,500. So then the bank only clears based on what the check was written versus what you wrote in the box for the dollar amount. So you're going to try to check some of those types of things. Or sometimes when you put 00, if your handwriting is sloppy, I've seen it clear for 90 cents instead of 0 cents. And so it could be minimal, not a big dollar amount, but a small dollar amount. But I see it happen. A lot of times it's because obviously they're check readers. So the reconciliation is to check all of those things, okay? Make sure we've captured everything that we should be capturing, checks are clearing the way they should be, and so on and so on. We're going to talk about entering bills. This is really going to be for people that actually print checks inside of QuickBooks. If you don't actually print a check inside of QuickBooks, entering the bill and marking it paid is just extra work. You're not really keeping an accounts payable because you're paying everything as soon as it comes in versus waiting a week, 2 weeks, or have terms of 30 days, whatever those might be. That would be why we would enter a bill. We're going to talk about paying those bills again inside of QuickBooks and printing checks. There's some customization features with printing checks that you want to make sure you have set up properly. And there's a couple little quirky parts to that we'll talk about. Then we're going to talk about revenue. So we've spent time talking about all our expenses and how we get all the data integrated into QuickBooks. Now we got to talk about revenue. So revenue is creating invoices so that we get paid. And that's going to be different for each industry. There's going to be a lot of customization you can do. we're going to be as general with this topic as possible so that you understand the mapping tool. I use that word very aggressively, mapping. Books maps where your income and expenses go. And so we have to make sure that our income accounts, the items that we're billing for on an invoice, go to the proper buckets so that you can see the things you want to track. Okay. So for myself, it might be I want to see what my tax income is versus my payroll income versus my consulting income versus my training income. Okay. So when I have those line items that I put on my invoice, I have to make sure they go to the proper bucket so that I can see all my different areas of revenue. Okay. Then it could be very, very, very high level and you just have sales because you're one industry and you do everything under sales. And then you could have a lot of things where it's nitty gritty and you want to track it. Okay. And we'll talk about that. Managing the items and mapping them, we talked about. We're going to reviewing matching transactions, which ties into the reconciliation. We're going to talk about how we edit and create items that maps up into creating invoices. And then we're going to talk about customer and vendor management. Okay. Because obviously we know customers come and go, vendors come and go based on pricing. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. So I am going to get rid of the PowerPoint here and get us logged into our QuickBooks. And let's see here. I use Google Chrome. Again, that's just my preference personally. And I just go to QuickBooks Online. And then I have saved my password, but obviously if you haven't, you'd have to type all your credentials in. Oh, it wants my name. Put our name on there. Again, that's just some of the wizards that we're going to go through as we're still first time using this QuickBooks. We're trying to figure everything out. So again, all these are wizards. Just click out of them. Okay, so this is our dashboard. So when we looked at our dashboard last week, there was nothing on it because we didn't have anything inside of QuickBooks. You can see now that it's starting to populate some of our data based on what we did last week with categorizations and things like that. We still have nothing in our sales bucket because we haven't actually done it yet. But you're starting to see that the dashboard is starting to use the data we're putting in here to obviously work with us, okay? Again, our black navigation bar over here, we're going to go into transactions. And then you'll see, obviously, when we looked at this last time, there were very few transactions, and now we have a lot more because we've been using our cards and working all week and spending transactions and paying bills and those types of things. So obviously, we have a ton of stuff down here that we would have to pay attention to. And then look down here and obviously more things to categorize. All right. So to review categorizing, why is categorizing important? So to do your reconciliation, everything in this bucket, it says the 299 transactions, the for review tab, should be entered for the time period that you're trying to categorize. Okay. So for example, if I want to categorize and reconcile the month of June, then all of these dated in June need to be entered inside of QuickBooks. Otherwise, I can't reconcile from my bank statement because my transactions aren't in. Okay. So we're not going to enter all of these for training purposes. We're going to enter a few more. And then we're obviously going to work through the reconciliation and show you a couple things that you can do, but you shouldn't have to do type of thing. So for KFC, that's meals and entertainment. So we would click add. Paychecks is a professional fee. So we'll click add on that one. Jersey Mike's is meals and entertainment. If you notice, there's no payee there. So we want to enter it. And the reason we want to enter it is so that when we look back at this information on a P&L, we know what that charge was for, not just that it was meals and entertainment. Okay. We have a deposit here. So we would probably, let's see here, what is our income buckets here? So our income buckets, that's billable income, service, and tax income. So we're going to keep it under service. That's proper. So we've entered a few transactions, okay? You can click on them, you can edit them, you can adjust them, change the name, all those types of things. We kind of talked about all that last time, okay? So if you look over here and see these blue words, go to bank register, we want to click on that. So a charge you might not see on the first screen might be your bank service charges. So how would we enter that? We would enter it manually, which we've done manual transactions before. So over here, below the filter here, it says add deposit. I actually want to add an expense. So I'm going to change that to expense, and then you'll see how it opened the module here to be able to enter information, okay? The payee, when I'm entering a bank fee, could be your bank provider. I'm not going to put one in because it's a bank fee. Okay, and my bank fee per month is $25. And then we should have an account called bank charges and fees, okay? Now this has to be dated. We were talking about June, so I'm going to do 6/30/24 so that it's in the month that we're going to reconcile, okay? So you'll see that that charge is entered now. Turned green, jumped down. It says transaction saved. So then to reconcile, you need a couple things to be able to reconcile. My go-to things are I print my bank statement off of my bank account, okay? Mostly because I'm not good with the highlighting on the screen type of thing, and I like to be able to physically write on it. I have a ruler most of the time with me, color highlighter, and a pen, okay? Those are my four things I need to do a reconciliation. Same thing goes for a credit card. You need the credit card statement, and then obviously those other options are items are optional. Loan, you will need the split between the loan. Sometimes you can see it online. Sometimes you get a statement for that loan. Obviously, line of credit, mortgages, car payments, all of that. You have to split what is principal versus interest. Okay. So then you can get to the reconciliation screen a couple ways. Because we're already in the ledger, we're going to go to this reconcile button right here in the top right corner. Okay. Now, again, you have a wizard. So if you've never reconciled and been using QuickBooks for a very long time and you get this wizard, whoa, we got a lot of work to do to get reconciled, okay? If you're brand new to QuickBooks and you get this wizard, makes total sense. You've never reconciled, okay? So get started. And again, here's more wizard. We're just going to skip that for now, okay? So this screen is really important. You need to make sure that the statement that you're looking at is the account that's listed here, because again, you can toggle between all these different accounts, okay? Here's our credit card, here's our bank statement. Those would be the two that we need to register because we haven't entered any loans, all right? Your beginning balance. So if you are doing QuickBooks reconciliation for the first time and you have never reconciled before and you are taking a snippet of your business, meaning your business has been established prior to January 1st of this year, but you decided to implement QuickBooks as of January 1st, okay? Your beginning balance is probably not going to match the first time you do a reconciliation. The reason for that is your beginning balance that's showing here is what was in the bank account when you started the integration with QuickBooks, not actually what it should be, okay? So if your beginning balance doesn't match, there's an adjustment that will need to be made. Um, After you make that initial adjustment, your beginning balance should always match. And if it doesn't match, then there's a problem inside of QuickBooks. And usually when there's a problem inside of QuickBooks, it will tell you like about where it says add the following information. It'll say your beginning balance is off. See if we can help you. And then it'll tell you, did you add a transaction? Did you delete a transaction? Why is it off? And then we can determine how to fix that problem. Okay. But if it's your first one, it might be off. But moving forward, after you've reconciled once, this beginning balance should match your beginning balance on your bank statement. Okay. Now, sadly, everybody's bank statements look different. So some bank statements show beginning balance and then ACH credits, check deposits, and then checks written and then ACH debits, and then it has an ending balance. Okay. Some of them say just total credits, total debits, yada, yada, yada. So sometimes for you to make sure that QuickBooks is tying through, it might take a little bit more work for you. But what is really important again is that your beginning balance matches and then that you're putting an ending balance in. Okay. So for training purposes to get to the next screen, I'm going to say my ending balance is $1 because obviously I haven't categorized everything, but we want to go through this module. Okay. And then I'm saying that we're still doing the end of June. So you can either type a date in there or you can click through, whichever you're more comfortable with. And the ending date for some things isn't going to be exactly the end of a month. Normally, bank statements are monthly, but credit cards can be mid-month to mid-month. Loans can be mid-month to mid-month. So your ending statement date is on your statement somewhere, and you need to make sure it's your ending date. So if you're looking at a credit card, date that your payment is due is not your ending statement date. You're looking for like a statement closed date. So I want you to pay attention to the difference there because there is a difference. Because that would change what you would be able to see on the next screen. Okay. Now, this is important because if you are trying to reconcile multiple years, it will show you any transaction from the time you started the QuickBooks file to that ending date. Okay. So for us, we've only categorized June and a few random in August, September, whatever, right? But we're only going to see June transactions on the next screen. Okay. So once you've tied out the beginning balance, you've put your ending balance in, you're in the right account, and you've done the date, you want to hit start reconciling. Now, again, these are wizards, so ignore these. If your QuickBooks is integrated, meaning you're not manually entering everything and you're not importing the data, QuickBooks is going to try to do the reconciliation for you. So that's what these gray lines are with the check mark. That means that QuickBooks recognized that it cleared within the month you're trying to reconcile and it had a dollar amount. Okay. The ones that are not checked are ones that we manually entered. Okay. So here's our bank fee for $25. So this isn't a perfect system. And it not isn't even if everything is integrated, it's still not always going to reconcile. And the reason you know it doesn't reconcile right now is because look at the difference. This should have a green check mark, not a yellow warning sign, and the difference should always be 0. If the difference isn't 0, something is wrong. You've typed something wrong, something isn't matched, there's a duplicate in here, something is selected that shouldn't be, something cleared for a different dollar amount. So the difference should always be 0. If you've done an entire month worth of entry and everything should tie out to the bank account, okay? And then you'll see here, it gives you your beginning balance again. Like I told you, there was a payment total and a deposit total so that you can see what it is to try to get you to your ending balance, right? So obviously we're not going to match because I put my ending balance as $1, but you guys should match. Now, if these are selected and they're not the right ones, you can click this little bubble here and hit select all, and it will select everything. So those 3 lines that were no longer selected are selected. And if you click it again, it unselects everything. So then if you need to go through and go, okay, so that KFC is right, this one is right, that was right, this is right, and you can just start clicking them one by one. Now, why did I say I need a ruler? Well, the ruler is going line by line down my statement so that I stay on task, because obviously if it's teeny print on multiple pages, you need to like follow it. The highlighter will be things that I'm missing or typos that are done so that I know where I need to make my corrections. And the pen is that I can cross off the other ones if I want to. Again, totally just my system in doing it. You don't have to do it that way. I do recommend at least having something to differentiate what's in and not in. So the highlighter would be my item there for that. Okay. So if you get into this and you're like, gosh, I just can't get it to match, I'm frustrated, whatever else, you can click save for later. Finish now, which means you're going to override it. And you can close without saving means that you're going to start later with it. Just totally start over because you're frustrated. Okay. I'm going to finish now to show you what that does. Okay. So hold on. It's warning you. Your difference isn't 0. Again, remember that big number it should be 0. Okay. And I said, I know because obviously my dollar ending is $1. So I'm going to enter the adjustment. Okay. So now I have a report here. And I print this report and I attach it to my printed out bank statement. Okay. And the reason I do that is then I know if I go back, I can say, oh, yep, this was done on this date, yada, yada, yada. Now, if you go back to our lovely bar here and you hit transactions and we're in our bank transactions where we normally are, there is a reconciliation tab here. You can reconcile from here, but you also have the history. So because I did that reconciliation, you can see I put an adjustment in. Okay. So I can see that I made some changes. I'm going to go back a screen here. And then you can attach your statement inside of QuickBooks if you would rather. or again, you can pull this report again. Okay, so if you have multiple years reconciled, it's going to say 22, 23, 21, 19, and so on and so on. Obviously, I just did 1 month in 24. So here's my 24 and my month. Okay. It also tells you when it's reconciled on. So if you have on the 12th day, business day of the month, I require that my financials are closed and good to go, you'll be able to enforce that and see if they were actually done at that point. Okay. So that's kind of the perks of it. Where did this adjustment go? This adjustment took us back over to our reports we looked at briefly at the very end. That adjustment goes over on the profit and loss, and it's a reconciliation discrepancy. Now, if you're an accountant looking at QuickBooks, this is a big sore. This tells me that there are $16,000 worth of expenses that either you didn't enter or they're wrong inside of QuickBooks. Okay. So doing the adjustment, if it's 25 cents or even $1, usually we don't care as accountants. When it's big dollar amounts like this, it's a big eyesore. Okay. And it obviously can skew your numbers on what your net income is, because here's an additional $16,000 in expenses. Okay. So you definitely want to make sure if you're doing an adjustment that it's either very minimal dollar amount or you know exactly why the adjustment is needed to be made, because you have to make sure that realistically this doesn't really show on your financials. Okay. That's why it's important to make sure everything ties through. The only time I usually see where adjustments need to be made is the first initial reconciliation, and it's because there was a dollar amount in the bank account prior to you syncing it. And so you would just have to make sure that that dollar amount ties through to what the reconciliation discrepancy is. And then technically QuickBooks has an account called open balance equity, which would be what that is. There was an open balance when you sunk the account into QuickBooks, and that would technically be where that transaction goes. That would then allow your bank to reconcile. Okay. So, but again, usually you want it to be 0. Okay. So now I reconciled and say, oh, I don't like that discrepancy's there. I want to maybe undo that. Okay. So you can go to history by account and you can click into this and you can click any of these numbers inside of here. So I'm going to click on the adjustment and it's going to bring up the transaction here. And I'm going to say delete because I didn't like that transaction. So now that transaction is gone. So what does that do to my reconciliation? Here's your warning that I told you would get if you deleted something. Your account isn't ready to reconcile. Your beginning balance is off. Boom, the dollar amount we deleted. Okay. And now you've got a warning sign. So QuickBooks does try to help you through this reconciliation process. Okay. It's the same process for the credit card, beginning balance, ending balance to statement date. Loans are a little bit trickier because that really is just based on the month you're reconciling the loan. But your loans do need reconciled and the principal versus interest does need entered. Okay. I am going to take a peek in our Q&A section. Again, just a reminder, if you have questions, please drop them in Q&A. That way, since there are so many of you on the training, as I answer the question, I can click it away so that our list stays clean and easier for us to follow. Dean, we don't talk a lot about inventory records in QuickBooks Online much at all because it's not really set up to house phenomenal inventory. If you want to reach out to me at the end, individualized, we can totally have a conversation about that, because since the widget itself doesn't really do inventory properly, we don't tend to teach much about it, okay? So Carla's asking if I get paid by cash and when I deposit the money, I get a $5 charge. If I deposit money, investment from my personal account in cash, how do I reconcile that into one invoice payment if the money goes from 2 sources? Carla, this goes into the match feature, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the class. So I'm going to leave this question on here so that you can see. We'll go back to it when we get to that module. Yes, Carla, that is correct. For the VA in Columbia, you categorize her as a contractor. Renardal, you have two legal entities. One is a for-profit and one is a nonprofit. You do need two QuickBooks accounts. Carla, you have $5 fees each time you deposit cash. You can go back and enter that manually, like we did. Click into there, change it to an expense and enter it. Just change the date so you do one for each month. You could just mass enter it. It just wouldn't be good practice, so I would recommend doing it by each month. Ida, you have several years that you have not reconciled, so the balance is way off. Why don't you try to reach out to me individually and we'll go over this. There's going to be a one-off entry we're going to do to get you caught up to the beginning of the year of taxes of which you have not filed. So if that is 2024, we would just do a mass adjustment, kind of like what we did. But we need to break it up so that it doesn't stick out on your financials like a sore thumb. David asks, is there any benefit to choose expense versus check when paying a bill in cash-based business? I'm usually writing a check. Uh, David, benefit, no. But if you select check, it's going to auto try to populate a check number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so you have to keep deleting that check number so that it doesn't show a check number versus if you click expense, it doesn't prompt you for that. Carla, it says if I click on the sales I have made in cash, then the difference was 0. Go to that amount of sales, and I don't know how to fix that. I'm not sure I understand that question. Could you give me a little more detail? Okay, I'm gonna scroll down a little bit here. I use account numbers as well as account names. I noticed that your account numbers do not show up when you post an item, nor not on your reports. How do you turn on the account numbers? Richard, that is inside of settings, your gear icon here. And under accounts and settings, there's a preference for you to find buried amongst those 5 or 6 tab options for you to click that you want to turn on account numbers. Karen, so when you voided that check in June, it zeroed out. So really what we should have did was you really should select the transaction. Did the check, I guess let me ask 2 questions here. Did the check clear that you wrote in August yet? Because really the downfall of this process, Karen, is you did the right thing. You voided the check, but when you voided the check, usually like in desktop QuickBooks, it creates a journal entry. So that voided zeros, and then you get a credit into the account, which would offset the wrong balance. And QuickBooks Online doesn't do that automatically. And then obviously you reissue the check again. Um, so that's why your beginning balance is off. Karen, something I could totally help you individually if you'd like. But yeah, really the big thing is going to be when that check clears again, selecting it in your next reconciliation because that will fix your beginning balance being off. Joanne, there is a way to put in an auto adjustment in QuickBooks desktop. It's the same type of thing. You try to finish the reconciliation. There's an option that says enter adjustment. Betsy, I paid my credit card through QBO with payments, does not display on reconciliation. How do I select the payment? Betsy, it should be coming from whichever account the money cleared from. So you paid your credit card from your checking account. So there should be a checking account transaction that you transfer to the credit card to get it to populate inside of your credit card reconciliation. Again, that could be a date thing too. QuickBooks will put it in based on the date it cleared, not the date it was paid. So you might have to open up your reconciliation a tad bit, maybe a day or two, to make sure you can see it. Chris, so if you do sync your QBO into QuickBooks, like you sync your bank account into QuickBooks, it will reconcile for you automatically. It just might not always be perfect. As long as everything is integrated, it will do it for you. And if it ends up being 0, I always just spot check the first couple till you get comfortable with QuickBooks to know that it's actually selecting the right things. This pertains to if you're having a lot of documents or a lot of bills that are the same dollar amount over and over again, you want to make sure it's selecting the proper ones. But otherwise, yes, it would do it for you. You just have to prompt it by going through and set it, beginning balance, ending balance, start reconciliation, and then it should do it. Sarah, we don't talk about connecting Wix to QBO. This is something that's done more on a personal level, so we can do that personally with you if you want to reach out after training. Anonymous attendee said bank statements and credit card separate reconciliations. The answer is yes. Will there be an overview set of this training? Yes, there will be a PowerPoint sent out to you guys and the video. Laurel, this is a fun question. Usually, if you've done a reconciliation, it should only show the beginning balance and usually matches. If it doesn't match, this might be something that you and I have to troubleshoot on our own. I don't recommend one way or the other about importing bank statements. As long as you have them somewhere, that's going to be what's important. Okay, guys, it looks like we still have a few more questions, but I'm going to kind of jump into the next one for timing purposes. I'll go back at the end and answer any questions that I haven't answered, as many as we have based on timing. And then obviously, if I didn't get to your questions before the end of the class today, you can always reach out to me. I give you my contact information at the very end, okay? So we have finished the reconciliation, our first topic of the day. So now we're going to talk about entering bills. So again, we're going to go over here to our lovely handy dandy black bar, and we're going to go into expenses. So we're going to work in this tab a lot today because here's our vendors, here's our bill modules, here's expenses we've categorized, some of those things are already here, okay? So we want to talk about entering bills. So we're going to go into the bill module. And then you'll see here we have for review, unpaid, paid bills. You have add bills. You have other options. You can upload from a computer. You can create a bill. You can do a reoccurring bill. We won't talk about those today. And then obviously once you have a bill, you can manage bills and those types of things. Okay, so we're going to go to add bill and we're going to create a bill, just a normal bill. So what's going to be really important about a bill is if we are paying for somebody that's already created in here as a vendor. Okay, so let's do Jersey Mike's because that's one we just set up today. And it comes up right here. You'll see that it just says Jersey Mike's because I didn't fill out any additional information for him. Okay. Jersey Mike's might have terms, might not. We're going to do everything due upon receipt for training purposes today. The date of the bill, I'm going to make this the 1st of September. Then it would have been due the 1st of September and say the bill number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. This would be an invoice number, bill number. You could put it as an account number. If you're doing a utility, you could just put it as like May Electric. You can type, words in there, whichever you prefer, okay? Then down here, we need to categorize this transaction. So this is still going to be meals. And then I'm going to say team lunch for training, okay? This is a description I'm choosing to put in here so that I know why my Jersey Mike's bill was $250, okay? Now you have save and schedule payment. I don't ever use that one. Save and new or save and close. So I'm going to hit save and new, okay? Now up here, see this little icon here? Woo, there's the bill we just created. So it's your little shortcut to go backwards to any bills you've created, okay? Now this bill is going to be printed on a check. And we have a big problem here, right here. I don't have an address. So if I printed this check and my team wasn't paying attention, they would just try to mail this check and the check would go nowhere because there's no address on it, okay? The way to fix that would be to actually go back into your vendor of Jersey Mike's and edit that information. Okay, you can't just type it here and expect it to print on the check. It won't. It will not print on the check at all. Okay, so I just want to make that very clear. It does not print. You just type it there. Okay, so let's create a new one so that we can see what it looks like when we have a different one. So I'm going to say we're going to pay Canton Score today. So I have to enter Canton Score because I've not paid them before. And boom, here we have the ability to enter the address again. Okay. So 123 State Road, Akron, Ohio, 44319. Okay. Now, if you notice, I didn't type anything in capital and whatever else. Okay. Now, normally you should, because this is how the check's going to print. And that doesn't look really professional. So I'm bringing that to your attention that it's something that we should pay attention to and make sure you do it right. Otherwise, it's more work for you to go back and edit it later because it's going to print exactly how you typed it in. Okay. We're going to say that they're on at 15 terms. So you'll see that my September 1st turned to September 16th and the bill date say is 33,552. Okay. And then again, now we got to do an expense. So education. I don't have an education bucket, so let's create one. So let's do down here, we're going to do an expense. Doesn't look like we have an education option in here. So let's do other business expense. Perfect. Education. And then we're going to hit save and close. So now you're still working in your bill module, but you were able to create a category. You've been able to create a vendor. Okay. So this could be QuickBooks Online training. Okay. And then you could put class, date, 9/5. Just making it up. Okay. And then we'll say it's $100. And as you can see, I got a typo in there. So we'll correct that. Okay. And then again, you can upload an attachment. So you can upload a picture of the bill if you wanted to. Again, this prompts you to just load it from your computer. You can make it and you can print it. So you can print this bill if you want. Printing the bill does not print the check. It just prints the bill. Okay. So hit save and new. Okay. So now we've created two bills. So I'm going to click out of the bill. And then you'll see that in our unpaid bills, now we have two bills. Okay. And again, you can hit schedule payment, mark as paid. You can edit the bill. You can duplicate it if you have like the same bill over and over again. Rent would be one of those that you could duplicate. You could delete it. Okay. So I want to go ahead now and click pay bills. So how do I pay the bills? So it wants to know where you're paying them from. So you could put in that you paid one of your electric bills on a credit card if you wanted to. But because we're going to print checks, that's going to be the whole premise of what we're doing. You would select a bank account. Okay. Do we have any questions about entering a bill? I will look at our Q&A section here. Can you add early discounts when adding a vendor? No, not in QuickBooks Online exactly. You can do it for invoicing, but not for vendors. You would just enter a line on the bill itself that you could name early discount and put a negative. Adam, it says, should I enter a line in my bank statement for the month? Example, started QB in July, bank only pulled for a few weeks. Yes. Sarah, if you put it on the memo line, it will print on the check. If you put that description sometimes. So I always just put it in the middle, but it totally is fine either spot. Because obviously putting March Wi-Fi on a memo line isn't a big deal. Laurel, that plays into contractors, which we actually talk about in the next class. There's a contractor tab that you could put their bills in. But if you're turning around and paying them, obviously you're going to track that in an expense to contractor expense with their name on the check payment. So there is no benefit for you for that, no. Marla, that depends on what's populating and what's not and what bank you are. If you can only get so much, get what you can, and then sadly you would need to manually enter the rest. Or there could be an import. We talked about importing last class from your bank account, but again, that would be something we'd have to do individually. So Joanne asked, what's the actual purpose of adding a bill if we pay it with either a check or a credit card and we track those expenses in QuickBooks? So the benefit of entering a bill is that if you're writing a check, it's putting the transaction in QuickBooks already so that when that transaction clears the bank, meaning the check clears, you're matching it, which we'll talk about in a little bit, versus um, categorizing it. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you're cutting a bunch of checks, it makes your QuickBooks balance more accurate before the checks clear. So your bank account might show you have $40,000 in it, but you have $10,000 worth of checks out. So QuickBooks tells you only have $30,000. So it's good for cash flow management. If you're not turning around and paying the bills the next day, it allows you to keep an accounts payable report, meaning that if you're monitoring your cash coming in versus your cash going out, you have a better picture of what you need to generate as a business owner from a revenue perspective to cover all your expenses. Okay, those are the big three reasons why. Most of you on this training, I'm going to venture to bet, are a little bit smaller businesses, and entering bills and stuff like that is just an extra step and might not be pertinent to you. And that's okay. But for like nonprofits or bigger corps and things like that, that they have other people that have to sign checks, they will use this a lot because they do a lot of different check writing items there. Okay. I am not going to show the pay electronically versus via check. Last time I tried to teach the pay electronically through QuickBooks, the payments never actually went through. So I don't teach it because it's not a module that I recommend anybody using. I either recommend that you allow it to come through the bank account because you've already paid it, or you're physically cutting a check in here. Is there a line item on my statement I haven't entered into QuickBooks? Where do I do that while reconciling? Can I switch bank back and forth in QuickBooks? Oh, yes, Eric, if there's a line item you missed, I recommend going through the reconciliation screen, marking all the things you missed, and then going back into either the for review if they're sitting in there or manually entering them. If you hit save for later, you can toggle back into the register and enter the information and then go back to re-reconcile, but you can't have both screens open at the same time. Okay. All right, so there's still a few questions I'm going to leave unanswered. Some of them don't pertain to what we're talking about now, so we'll maybe get to those at the very end, guys. Okay, so we're going to keep moving. So paying bills. So we're in this module now where you can see the two bills that we entered are listed here. We would want to pay them out of one of our items here based on the date you're writing the check, which would be today because it's going to default on today. And then check number. This is obviously important that it matches to what your actual check number is. So say my check number is 1,000. And then you can click here if you want to pay both. If you only have money to pay one, then just pay the one. That's totally up to you guys, okay? So you want to hit save and print. And then it brings up our print setup wizard, okay? So our print setup wizard, if you're in a free trial, I want to emphasize this, if you are in a free trial, you will have to set this up every single time you print checks, okay? It will default to the default setting for the free trial. Once you are no longer a free trial and you are an active person doing it and you set it up, it will stay with your settings moving forward, okay? I tell you that because if you have checks with lines on them, it will print wrong and your checks, some banks won't clear them if they don't print properly. And then it's, checks are expensive, so it can be a waste, okay? So you can preview a sample print. That way, then you can hold it up to your checks and make sure it lines up properly. And if it doesn't, then you need to go down here and go continue setup. And then print another sample. And if that still doesn't do, hit no, continue setup. And then now it gives you the ability to actually move the stuff around. Okay. Now, if you move it down like this, when you print your check, it's going to be higher up. If you move it up, it's going to print your stuff lower. Okay. Why is it backwards? No idea. I promise you it's backwards. Every time I think it's not backwards, I print checks wrong and I'm upset about it. Okay. So know that it's opposite. And that obviously sometimes it's just simple, like you're just off just a little bit. Okay. I recommend once you finish checks that have lines, order them without lines because it's a lot easier to have a little wiggle room when you're printing them. Because obviously every printer feeds them differently too. So you could have this set up and print on a printer that doesn't feed as efficiently as a newer printer, and then you're going to be off a little bit anyways. So the lines make the off checks look really bad, where if you don't have lines on your check, it's not so bad. Okay. And again, you move this around and print and samples and everything like that, and then you can hit finish setup once you've got it properly, okay? So now our check is not in our pay bills because we've already quote unquote paid it, but it hasn't been printed yet either, okay? So we'll have to go back out of there because we had to do that wizard of setting it up. And then we need to look under paid. So you'll see our thing is there. And then let's see here. Let's click on it. And it says it's paid. But I don't know why. Oh, there it is. Okay, so it's in our to be printed screen. Okay. So from here, then from save and close, you can hit print check. And again, it's going to make sure you have the proper check number. And then now if you hit preview and print, it shouldn't take you to the setup module. It should take you to a screen to see it. And again, if you're nervous, Nelly, like me, I print this on paper and still line it up and then print it again. Okay. That's a preference on me. Again, and if you had a memo line, your memo line would show down here. Obviously, you have a signature line on this side. So you have some missing pieces because all you're printing is the actual check itself at that point. Okay. And then if you hit X out of here, QuickBooks is going to ask you if it printed okay. So if it didn't print okay, you want to keep it in your print list. If it did print okay, you can take it out of your print list and say, yes, it printed okay. Okay. Or if you had your printer set on double-sided, and obviously checks are only one-sided, you might only need to reprint some. And then you click here and it tells you which one to reprint. Okay. But I'm going to say for training purposes, it printed correctly. And boom. Now nothing's here. If I go back into my transactions and go into my bank register, here is that $100 charge right there. Okay, so it went right into the proper ledger. It has a check number like we talked about, and it says accounts payable. So let's do the pay bill again. So again, under expenses, you want to go to bills. You want to hit pay bill. Make sure you're in the proper account. Check number starting. Save and print. Charting check number is proper. Preview and print. Here it is. You would hit print. It's going to bring it up here to hit print again. And then you can tell it you printed correctly. And now you're all caught up. If you go under expenses, under paid bill, there's our 2 bills that we've paid. Okay. So the bill module, again, makes sense if you're tracking expenses for long periods of time. Technically, if you file on accrual basis and you have bills you haven't paid before the end of the year, you'll want to use that. And then if you tend to print quite a bit of checks. Now, you could go to expenses here, and if you just needed to print a check and you didn't want to enter a bill, you could just hit check instead of enter bill, and you could type in who you're doing and you can print it from here. So if you have a one-off item or like you're trying to do a Christmas bonus or something like that, you can just print checks without entering a bill as well. And again, it still goes into the account you tell it it's going into. It will still populate under expenses. It just doesn't generate an accounts payable report. Okay. All right, let me jump back into Q&As and see what we've got as we finished, that entering bills, paying bills, and printing checks. Yes, Sarah, technically you can put all your expenses under expenses versus bills. You can also just categorize from what's clearing the bank account as well. So it says, what type of transaction entry would you enter to pay yourself with a check? I would just enter an expense. Really, the checks in here, guys, are if you're printing them. If you only have the small handwritable checks, you don't have to do it this way. You could just enter the expense so that you have the check number there. But yeah, it's up to you. Teresa says, if I already paid by check manually, how do I just enter the check information? I don't need to print. So you would go into the register. So from here, I don't want to save this transaction. Go to transactions, go to bank register, and you would enter it here. Let's change this to check so that you can put a check number in and put the date you wrote the check. If you have a payroll check paper that is dated 8/2, but the recipient deposited on 7/31, which is also the clear date, how do you reconcile the transaction when the reconciliation date is the end? Africa, the reconciliation, if it cleared on 7/31, then it would be included in that reconciliation. If it's dated 8/2 and they obviously cleared it early, open your reconciliation up to 8/2 just so that you can see that transaction and be able to select it, or you can change the date on that item to 7/31, whichever you prefer. When you open the date on the reconciliation, it will look funky because your close date will be 8/2 instead of 7/31. So as long as you're comfortable with that and or will remember that moving forward for the next 30 days while you do the next one, that's great. If not, I would backdate the check to the date it cleared so that it's easier for you in that reconciliation. Carlin, not everything has to have a check mark, only the things that cleared. So you might have, if you have things in your reconciliation screen that have not cleared, they're either duplicates or checks that have not been cashed yet, or bills you have paid where those have not been cashed yet. But 95% of it should clear and have a check mark. If it doesn't, then you have to figure out why. Is it because it's something that hasn't cleared the bank yet, or is it a duplicate? Because it could be a duplicate deposit, duplicate expense, those types of things. Betsy asked, if you go back to reconcile, how do you delete a prior reconciliation, or can I modify the statement ending another way? So Betsy, this is the downfall of QuickBooks Online. The only person that can edit your reconciliation is your accountant, and they can actually undo it for you. But they are the only ones, even though you are the primary owner, primary admin of this account, that can actually do that. And I don't know why that is. It's silly. You could add yourself as an accountant so that you have that feature, and then delete it when you don't need it so that you're just primary user, not eating up two users. But the only person that can do anything with undoing previous reconciliations is an accountant. Okay. So I've answered all the questions about bills. So we're going to take a few minutes and start one more little module, and then we'll take our break about 10:30. We're going to take our break, just so you guys know. So you got about a half an hour left. So we're going to talk about invoicing. Okay. So again, over on our lovely black navigation bar here, we're going to use the sales tab. So the sales tab is going to show us all sales, invoices, if you use estimates, if you use sales orders, payment links, if you have that set up, customers, and products and services. Okay. So big deals here. Everything's rolling around. And we're going to play around for purposes of this training session, invoices. So what do we create an invoice for? Invoices are created for things that you are trying to get paid for. Okay. For me, that could be me prepping a tax prep, me running a training seminar. For a landscaper, it could be for mowing grass, laying mulch, major construction. For somebody redoing a roof, it could be roof construction. Technically, if you use QuickBooks for rentals, it could be to collect rent. Those would be things that you would create invoices for. This is for money that you're trying to get paid for. Okay. Now, do you have to create invoices? No. If all you care about is that everything that goes into that business account is only revenue for your business, and you just click it as sales, that's fine. You wouldn't need to create an invoice. Okay. But if you wanted to see different items broke up so you knew what they were, or your clients were requesting invoices, then obviously that's what you would create invoices for. Okay. So let's create an invoice. Now, QuickBooks Desktop has a ton of customization when it comes to what your invoices look like and the templates and things like that. QuickBooks Online does not. Your template is boring. There's not a whole lot you can adjust. So bear with me because they are very basic looking invoices. Okay. Now I want to reiterate, when we set up our QuickBooks account, we talked about making sure we filled out all this information, the company name, the address, the email address, and obviously you can edit company if you need to. If you have a logo, you can put a logo in here. If you look over here, you can turn on certain things or turn off certain things based on what you're trying to do. Payment options, this applies if you're using the payment portal in QuickBooks, which we talked about briefly last class, costs money and they take up a fee. So we don't really teach that because it's not something we're setting up. Here's your design. So these are your customization features that you have. You could do the modern template. You could do a standard template. You can, if you do the modern, then you get to select a color and you can select a font. There's your customization there. Okay. And then scheduling, obviously you have the ability to make stuff reoccurring. So if you are like me and my consulting is a flat fee per month, you could set up everybody on reoccurring invoices so that every month, boom, 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 it creates, okay? Because it's the same dollar amount every month, right? Um, and then you can do invoice reminders. So if you send an invoice, the good news about QuickBooks is if you email an invoice, you can see they've opened the invoice, you can see they've viewed the invoice, and then you can determine that they just either aren't paying you or the check might be in the mail. Okay. So you have some options there. So then we go over here. So we would need to add a customer. Right now, our only customer is the one guy that we said paid us, Nick. So let's create another one. So we're going to say Doug. Doug Myers. Okay, so we're going to create that. So now it brings up our ability to actually enter proper information for Doug. Okay, so first name, Doug Myers. Email address, Doug at AOL.com. You can put a phone number in here. So you can use QuickBooks to be like a customer portal holder. Okay. If he has a website, fax machine, any of those types of things. If he's a subcontractor, which he's a customer. And then we're gonna put PO Box 123. And we're gonna say that's Akron, Ohio 44319. You can see if he's had a previous address, if it changes, you could put notes. You can attach a tax exempt form, a W-9 form. You can keep payment information in here if you are obviously going to run cash credit card. You could keep additional information here's their exempt information, and then if they have a balance, okay, and you hit save. So woohoo, we set up a customer, okay? So Doug Myers, you can see all this information here. You can see his email address automatically populated in here. Invoice number, obviously, once you have a beginning number, it'll continue to grow from there. But if you are coming in from desktop or starting your business late, you will probably need to start that beginning number at a proper number. So for me, we're gonna just say we need it at 335.78. If you have terms, I don't have terms. My stuff is due upon receipt. So then it changes that September 1st to September 1st. Okay. If you have terms of 30 days, then September 1st to October 1st, and so on and so on. So you can play with that, due upon receipt for me. And then products and services. Okay, so these are the items we're selling, the things that we're trying to collect money on. Okay, and QuickBooks already says hours and services, which is pretty generic if you think of it. So for me, I'll use myself as an example. I'm going to say tax prep. Actually, I'm going to call it tax income because that's going to be what I see. Okay, and then description, this would be what the customer sees. Oh, good, it didn't have it. So back up one step. We created tax income. It is a service. I don't need a picture of the image. I don't use QR codes, but if you do have a SKU, I don't have a category. I can put in a description here. I'm not going to because everybody's taxes are done differently. So there's federal forms, state forms, city forms, schedules, all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to put a rate in either because again, that separates. But if you're selling mulch and you know that mulch is $18 a yard and you're going to mark it up to $24 a yard, then you could say that the description is mulch and then you just put in how many yards individually and then the rate at whatever dollar amount. Okay. And then this has to be mapped somewhere. So this is the mapping going on, the income account. And so I would want to do it because we created tax income. I want it to go into my tax income account. Okay. So anything I invoice that I'm using the product or service of tax income is going to show in my tax income account. Okay. So I'm going to hit save and close. So down here, the description, I would put in 2023 tax prep. And then I would put federal 1040 Ohio IT 1040 City of Akron Schedule C. Okay, that would be majority of some of the tax returns I might do. Okay. And if it wasn't a specific customer of Doug Myers, right, I would put maybe a customer's name in here too. That's my detail that I want so the customer knows what they're paying for. Okay. It is a quantity of one and the price would be $2.50. Okay. And then down here you see it says $2.50 and $2.50. Okay. So then now I can hit review and send. And it's going to bring up, this is what your customer would see in their email. Your invoice is ready, a total of $2.50. And then you can click view the detail. Okay. And then it tells them who it's from. Again, your email from Intuit is not a one they can respond to. Their email, which you put in there, if you need additional emails, you can type from this screen. So you can always tell it to send you as a copy, and then new payment request, and then it will say the invoice number, and then it's just their generic message, okay? And then you can hit send. I'm not gonna hit send because I don't know if this Doug at AOL is somebody's real email address, just so we're on the same page. But this is what the customer would see. Okay. Now we go back into sales under invoices. Now we have an unpaid invoice and we show a list of them down here. And then because I said due upon receipt and we dated it September 1st, it tells me it's overdue. Okay. Now you can edit, receive payment, or do any of these options. Send a reminder. Obviously, it will tell you if they viewed it. You can view activity. It'll tell you if they've opened it, viewed it, see, open, sent, paid, deposited. Okay. Once they pay you, so like a lot of clients will then just give me a check, I would click receive payment. And then tell it what type of payment I took in, check number, and then deposit it into what account. Okay. A lot of times we'll use undeposited funds. And the reason for that is because if you go to the bank and you take 10 checks for different dollar amounts, it can be overwhelming to try to match that deposit if you just put it in the bank because you're going to see all the individual deposits. So that would be why, okay? And again, if for some reason somebody then doesn't pay you or stiffs you, I never delete anything, I hit void. Void takes the invoice to 0 but leaves the history, okay? So definitely something that's very important. Now let's do one more. I want to create a couple items because that's the whole point of obviously this. All right, let's see here. So go back into invoices and let's go to products and services. So this is the items. They're called products and services or items pending what list you're looking at, okay? So you'll see here's the tax income that we created, okay? So from here, if you are buying another company, but you already own a similar company and you want to have all the same items or products and services, you can import that, okay? Import batch. So it'd be a big deal to be able to bring that in and have all your companies have the same items, especially if you are doing similar things, okay? You also can just create them one by one. So from here, we want to create a new service. Okay, so this one we would call training income. From here, I'm going to create the training. And then the rate for training, we'll just make it a dollar amount for now, just to fake, so you guys can see how this populates. And then technically I don't have an income bucket that I want for this, so I want to create it. And again, you can create it from here. So add new item, it is income, and then save and close. Okay, so now what does that look like? Because we put a description in that one. So let me go to an invoice here. Let's create an invoice. And then, so if I put in training income, it tells me it's a training course and charges a flat rate. So I don't have to do anything else with that other than maybe I would put a date on here if it was me. Okay. If you need more lines, add more products and services, add more products and services. If you got too many lines, hit delete, delete. Okay. You can leave a note for the customer. Please make checks payable to blah, 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 blah. You can attach an image if you have receipts for a specific job. So you have some customization there. So I'm going to hit save. Oh, I need to pick a customer. We're going to do this to Doug again, make our life easier. Save. Now, print and download. Excuse me. Here's what our invoice looks like. So our company information, again, if you have a logo, it'll be over here. Bill to, ship to, you could eliminate this if you don't need it. Invoice detail, what you're invoicing for, and a total. And then obviously if you had written a message to a customer or anything, it would populate about right here, okay? So as you can see, it's a very generic looking invoice. And again, if you hit manage, you can see these customization features. You can obviously view a PDF view, email view, all that kind of stuff just to try it. And then if for some reason you're creating an invoice, but obviously have already received payment, it gives you an option to receive payment right here, okay? So let's dive into the Q&A about creating invoices. Let's see what we got. Mayo asks, what is better, voided or deleted invoice? I void. I want the history. Because usually the only reason we're deleting an invoice is either a deal went bad or somebody stiffed us, right? So we obviously don't want the income to sit on our accounts forever, but I want the history to know what I was stiffed on. And then obviously I could backtrack to see what I would have charged them so that I can know that if they come back to me, hey, you got to clear up this previous balance before I can make you current. So I always, no matter what it is, transactions, journal entries, all of it, I recommend void, 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 never delete. Delete means it's gone forever and you have no history unless you've got it printed out somewhere. So John, it says, what's the best way to handle bank transactions that have credit card fees taken out before deposited? Then he gives an example, but he needs it to show the full 1,000, obviously, and then minus the fee. So John, I have two questions for you. Do you actually invoice inside of QuickBooks and mark it paid, or are you just receiving the bank transactions? And while we're waiting for John to answer that question, I'll look at another question here. So the next question is, if you have deposits for undeposited fund, when the bank account shows the deposits, will it be able to match with multiple invoices? The answer is yes. And when we come back from our break and start talking about matching transactions, I will show you how to do that, Kenzie. Okay, so John, if you create an invoice in QuickBooks and you mark it paid, when that transaction comes in through the invoice, there's a match button, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And I will show you at the bottom of that matching screen is a resolve button. So you will match that to that 1,000 and resolve it for the fee. Because it will allow you to match for amounts greater than the deposit. And then you will resolve, and at the bottom, you'll categorize that resolved dollar amount to the fee. Okay, so we'll talk about that after we come back from our break. It says our accounting firm told us QuickBooks can be used to auto pay and use the invoice option to auto upload into QuickBooks for easier reconciliations. That would be the integration feature, which is the bank integrating in there. And then there are auto entries that you can put in with rules. We talked about those in the first class. And then categorizing, and then that does make for easier reconciliation. Yes. Richard, yes, accounts receivable show up on that report, correct. It's the same as AP. If a person or a company who is both a member and a vendor, do you recommend creating two different records? Stephanie, the answer is yes, but you will have to put like a period or an initial or something because you can't have a vendor and a customer the same name. Laurel says, what's the best way to track the breakdown of products and sales and profitability? Should the detail be in the products and services or chart of accounts? Laurel, that's a little bit of both. So you're going to have like what we call a cost of goods sold bucket. This is basically the cost to sell your product or service. Okay. And then that could include things like labor, um, material costs, processing fees, those types of things. And then you'll have your general overhead, which would be like utilities and things like that. But you would need to track kind of both based on what piece you were trying to find profitable. And then the breakdown is of what you're going to want to see as a personalized thing to you. At the end of the day, your accountant puts in X amount of numbers is sales, no matter what bucket it came from, and your expenses are put in and you get the same profit line. But if you're trying to see something specific, that breakdown is what you are trying to track. So Tracy, if you put in the wrong payment amount, how do I change it? So uh, basically on this screen here, where your invoices are, it would show like a partial payment or an overpayment, and you can click on it and click edit invoice. And then it will show you like there was a payment applied, and you should be able to click to get into that payment. Like, let's see here. I'll hit receive payment. Let me do one to receive it. Let me say I made this for $450. Okay. So you'll see it says partially paid. I entered the wrong amount, quote unquote, right? And then I would want to hit edit. And then where it says partially paid, it should be right here, payment, and you can click on it and then adjust that payment to whatever dollar amount it should have been. Okay. Yes. Can you do something similar to the training income as a pop-up event or added under income? Yes, that is correct. Tracy, yes, you can delete a payment. So if you go into sales, and if I go here and I click edit, and I scroll down and I go to payment, underneath in the middle here, the black bar, hit more and hit delete, and that will delete that payment. Okay, trying to get my questions to connect the paper. So David said, what about refunding a paid invoice? Do we have to enter all the data, or is there a way QBO will reverse the corrected categories? So if you refund a customer, you're either usually writing a check, or you're going to see the transaction reversed inside of your bank account. And you can either create a bucket called refund, or you can apply it to the bucket where the customer paid you. So if the customer paid me training income and then I refund training income, I would take that expense that I see leaving my bank account, the payment going back to the customer, and apply it to training income, because that would zero out that number and make that bucket accurate. Or you could just have a refund bucket, David. But no, I wouldn't undo the invoice or create anything like that. You just need history to show proof that you paid the customer back, which would be a check of some sort, I would assume, or a reversed credit card payment or something. So you would see the money come into the bank account and the money leave the bank account. So if the customer pays more than they should, how do you register it as a credit? So same place, if you go to sales and you receive a payment, so say they paid 600 instead of 500, which is what was due, hit save and close. It tells me the payment is saved. And now if you go look at that customer, Doug Myers, he has a credit right there. And then you can apply the credit inside the invoice screen as well. When you are receiving a payment, you can apply the credit. Okay. So Tracy, if the client pays less than you agree, how do you account for that? Put the payment in that you received, and then you have to determine if you're writing off the difference, meaning you're going to put a discount line on the invoice to zero it out, or if you're going to try to pursue collecting the rest. Yes, Christy, you can do an invoice and print it instead of sending it. So over here, if we go back to invoices, and we edit an invoice here, so it's open to invoice, you'll see over here, well, I guess it's in the middle of the screen. There's a print and download option, and then you print it. You can also, when you go to save and send, there's a save and print option. So right now it's a save and send because he has an email, but there is a save and print option there too. David, it doesn't automatically add the watermark past due on those invoices. That's under preferences, and you want to turn that on, that it will notify past due. Again, in your gear icon. So Betsy says she had pre-printed invoices that she used in QuickBooks Desktop, but has been unable to figure out how to use them with QBO. Sadly, Betsy, I am in the same situation you are. I have always printed on my letterhead and it was pretty with my invoices. QuickBooks Online does not have that customization. You can delete or take off features to try to get it to fit, but odds are it will almost never fit, sadly. QuickBooks the QuickBooks invoicing module is a very basic module, and there are 3 or 4 key things that QuickBooks Desktop does that Online does not. The invoice customization is one. There are payroll issues, which we don't talk about much. It does not print signatures on checks, which for those of us that are virtual bookkeepers is usually pretty important. So those are just some of the things that it just does not manage well. Michael, yes, you can use the tag feature to do it towards a customer. Sadly, at the end of the year, if there's something that you need a total for that customer, going through and reviewing tags can be kind of cumbersome versus putting the payee name in as the customer. So Carla, that's fine. If you received cash for payments you received, but did not deposit most of them, but marked them as paid, so you're accounting for the cash. To deposit that income, you just need to do an entry to say that it was owner's draw, meaning that you kept the cash, so that that doesn't just linger in that paid screen, because that'll get filled up pretty quick. David asks, how many days after bank closing date should you reconcile to minimize reconciliation work? This is depending on timing per se. Okay, I tell people within the first 15 days you should be ready to reconcile. If Friday is the last day of the month, then your bank statements might not be ready by Monday. It depends on banks and how quick they issue them. If it's more of the middle of the week, then within a day or two you have them. But you can reconcile as soon as that date closes and your bank has issued the statements. Joyce asked, going back to the bill section we just covered, if you pay something with a bank card, so a credit card, and it shows on the bank account, do I add it as an expense or a bill already paid? I would just add it as an expense, Joyce. So it says, how do you handle an invoice with a declined payment? So I have a couple questions here. Did the check reject or the card decline? And do you think the customer's going to make it right? Or is this something that you're going to have to write off? And while we're waiting for that answer, it says when you have a handwritten check already, where do you put the check number on the bank register screen? Okay, so if you go into transactions and you go to bank register, make sure it says check. Not that it's one of these other options, it says check, and then it says reference type number is the check number. Okay, so if you think they will make it right and pay it, then you will see, you will leave that invoice unpaid. If there's a charge that you're incurring for the declined payment, a bounce fee, those types of things, you might need to update it. If it was a check that bounced, you obviously will receive payment. You then will reverse that payment back out. And then when they pay it again, receive the payment again. Personally, for simplicity purposes in that, if it's a check, I would delete the payment off of the invoice. Okay. The way we showed you, you go into the invoice, see where the payment is, and hit delete. And then when it comes through the bank transaction, because you're going to see a deposit and then the next day reject, I would just put that in like bank fee. So bank fee income $30, bank fee expense $30. That nets to zero, and that leaves the invoice still marked as unpaid, but gives you history of the check bouncing. And you can put on the memo line that it was a customer's bounced check. Okay, perfect. So guys, it is 10:30. We're going to take a 15-minute break. So come back at 10:45 and we will continue to see if we can't peck through some more of these questions when we first get started. If you want to drop any questions in the Q&A during break, feel free. But go ahead, use the bathroom, get something to drink if you need a snack to be motivated. And then when we come back, we'll keep going through. We've got 4 more sections to cover before noon today. So I will see you guys in 15. Let me get my screen shared. Okay, so I'm going to take a minute and go over just a few questions, see if we can't chuck out some of these questions, and then we'll dive back into our last 4 sections. So let me share my screen here. Perfect. You guys should be able to see QuickBooks. And it says, they said, would you give your opinion using Mello instead of Intuit for paying bills and receiving invoices? David, I've actually not heard of that software or used it personally, so sadly I could not weigh in on that. I don't know if you want to see if you drop that in the chat, anybody else in the group maybe has. Jeffrey, my contact information will be at the very end. I will give the last slide of the PowerPoint has my phone number, email address, and everything like that. Gloria, there will be a recording of this session. Gwen will email that out along with the PowerPoints. Derek, it does end at 12. That is correct. So it says, if a customer prepays, how do I register the credit? So under sales, there is, you can do it under customer. You would create a sales receipt. And this would say that they paid you X amount of dollar, and then it would show as a credit on the customer. We have a question. Do we have a webinar on desktop? We do not at the moment. You can always reach out to Canton Score and see if they have anybody else that might be running any. Or if you would like to reach out to me directly, I can see if we can do some one-on-one training with desktop. Carla, so if a client pays you but only pays half of the invoice, you cannot void it. That is correct. And you should mark it as a discount for the rest to zero it out if you don't think they're going to pay you the rest. So Beth asked, my QuickBooks balance and bank balances are different a lot. Why does that happen? So that happens if you look in the transaction tab. Your bank balances will be different because you have uncategorized transactions is the first thing. So this 210 or all these things down in the for review would allow these numbers not to be the same. If you have checks that you wrote inside of QuickBooks, but they haven't cleared the bank account, it would be different. If you have duplicate transactions, that would be different. So things that are in there twice that shouldn't be. If you have duplicate sales, again, you marked an invoice paid and a deposit hit through the syncing of the bank and you didn't tie them together, that would happen. But usually you want them to be relatively close, but it is, Beth, it is common that they don't match for those random reasons. So it says if I have a different property under different LLCs, should I have different QuickBooks? The answer technically is yes. However, you could use the next level QuickBooks that allows you to use classifications. It's the $90 a month, and each LLC or each building itself could have its own class because as a real estate, you have to track expenses based on location. And you could use each location as a class and then implement it however on the tax return. That would be a preference with you. Obviously, 2 QuickBooks subscriptions for $35 a month is $70, or upgrading it is $90, so it's just as expensive either way. So Sarah, if we use our car for business, can we claim anything other than mileage? You either claim mileage or you claim all the other stuff, repairs, maintenance, lease, yada, yada, yada. So it's one or the other. If you're using mileage, then mileage is the only thing you'll write off. We're going to answer one more question. So Melanie, it says if I delete an entry, how now my reconciliation is not in balance. How do I reverse the reconciliation? So sadly, you cannot reverse the reconciliation yourself. Only the accountant can. But if you correct the error you made in the previous reconciliation, and when you do your next reconciliation, tag that transaction in it, you will fix the beginning balance problem and should match at the end. So that's a workaround by selecting the transaction that you deleted in error in the following reconciliation. Okay, so back into QuickBooks, we're going to talk about now reviewing matching transactions. So the matching transactions are in my opinion, the most confusing aspect of QuickBooks. Okay. And I say that out of love because it's a love-hate relationship with QuickBooks. It's if you don't do the matching transactions right, you have duplicate income. So you keep, or duplicate income or duplicate expenses. So you keep hearing me say duplicates, 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 okay? The way we know it's a duplicate is that you have a ton of stuff in your reconciliation screen that has not been selected, okay? And will not be selected because you closed that time frame. So how do we determine this? QuickBooks is going to figure out some of it for you, meaning the dollar amount and the check number will match with the dollar amount and the check number clearing the bank. So it will prompt you to match it, okay? Sometimes it will match on the deposits because they match within a similar date range, but they're the same dollar amount. So I'm going to scroll through for a couple purposes here. I'm going to pull out of our bank account a couple transactions in here because we don't have anything in here for it to match to get it to manually match, okay? So I'm going to put in a bill for Jersey Mike's and we'll go, and this is on 6/18/24 and it's for 1409. And then I'm going to try to find another one. Let's see here. So we can do 6/21. We wrote a check. It was 1184, check number for 1500. Okay. And then I'm going to do on the opposite side too, I'm going to do a deposit. So PNC deposit. That's on 6/21 for 44.50. And let's do this one too. 6/20 for 5750. Okay. So we're going to go through all the things we've been working with. Okay. So let me go. First thing, we're going to put the expenses in. So let's hit an expense. I'm not going to create a bill and everything. I'm just going to enter an expense like we talked about. So just enter an expense. So this is for Jersey Mike. And the date of this transaction, it was 6/18. And this is me forcefully getting it to match so you can see what it looks like. This is not something you guys would normally do, okay? So I can hit save and new. And I'm going to go here and type in a new transaction because I have a check as one too. I'm going to use myself here. And then the check number was 1184 and date was 6/21. So I would have wrote this check. Probably the 16th would be okay. I'm going to put it as owner's pay. It's me taking money. I'm going to hit save and close. Okay, so then I put 2 expenses in. Okay, so now let's go back over to transactions. And if we scroll down, look, it says a match is found. Okay, so because it's Jersey Mike and I typed in Jersey Mike and it's on this within a day or two of it, and it's the same dollar amount, it's prompting it to match. Okay, so QuickBooks realized it was a match, right? But it doesn't always realize they're matches. So this is like, woo, it worked, it's perfect, awesome. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that this transaction that's in this screen here that sunk in from my integration with the bank is tied to a transaction that I already entered into QuickBooks. Okay, so I'm not entering it twice. I'm matching them together so that it's one transaction that goes in for this one. Okay, so you would click match. Now, here's the 1500. Okay, again, check number within the date range, meaning it's the same month and it's for 1500. Again, I don't want to enter the transaction in this screen without tying it to the check that I already added into QuickBooks as an expense, right? I need them to merge together by matching them so that it's one transaction instead of 2. Okay. Now, if you click on this and this transaction is not the right transaction, check number isn't right, the person that it says it's paying isn't right, okay? You can flip it to a categorize and put the proper information in and hit add instead of match, okay? But if it does match, you want to leave it as a match and click match. Okay. So now where I can check this to make sure that they merged into one transaction instead of two transactions, is if I go up here and I go to reconcile. This is the quickest way to do it. And to go here and put $1 in for my reconciliation and put end of June, because everything we've been doing is in June. And then from here, you can navigate here for payments. Here's that 1,500, and there's only one of them in here, right? And then here's the Jersey Mike's, and there's only one of them in here, okay? You can also click payments to sort them, so you can see duplicates pretty easily by same dollar amount type of thing. Obviously, if you wrote them within the same day, you could see them here too, okay? But they merged into one. They did exactly what we wanted them to do. Okay. So those of you that are doing the manual entry side, when you're cutting checks, when they clear the bank, it should match. If it doesn't match, something's wrong. And we would need to evaluate why. Your reconciliation is your check point for that. Okay. So every 30 days you check it, because you don't want a bunch of stuff sitting in here because it didn't clear, because that would be a problem, right? Okay. So go back to transactions. So that's the expense side of matching it. Okay. Same goes for credit card. And if you are manually importing your data into QuickBooks, okay, and you import dates that cross over each other. So yes, or last week we imported through current date, right? And then say we forgot that we imported to current date. So that would have been 9/5. So I decided to import from 9/1 to 9/11. So that 9/1 to 9/5 are duplicates, right? If you've already categorized it, QuickBooks will recognize that and should match them together and try to eliminate that duplicate problem. But it does happen. So I just want you to be prepared for it. It totally happens, okay? So now let's talk about the deposit side of matching, okay? So we're going to go into our sales tab because I got to create some invoices and mark some stuff paid so that we can match. So let's do invoice, create an invoice. And I'm going to create a couple. So bear with me as I'm just randomly throwing numbers out for training purposes for us. So and then let's do. And there's no rhyme or reason to the numbers I'm creating. Again, it's just for training purposes, because I'm going to show you what it looks like when you have deposits that match automatically, and then when you have deposits that have more than one item in them, okay? Okay, so I've created the invoices I need to tie out to the couple deposits we talked about. So now we got to go in and mark them paid. So we're going to receive the payment. And then do check. It's 21st. Okay. So remember, this client had a credit, so it automatically applied the credit. It says he only owes 2,900. Here's your credit down here. Okay. Now I'm going to unapply that credit because I want it to be the 3,000 for simplicity purposes, but I wanted you to see how the credits populate once you've entered them on a client. Okay. So this little arrow, I'm going to hit save anew. And then we need Angie to come up. Angie paid the full 5,750 on 20. Save anew. And then we need one more. And he paid the full 1,450. So now that we've marked and paid, go back over to our transaction tab here. Bank transactions. And let's scroll down here. So now you'll see that when it's somebody that's the same dollar amount around the same time, it's going to match, right? So this worked. It did it again, exactly what we wanted. This was one invoice that I had marked paid for the same dollar amount of a deposit in the bank for matching purposes. Okay. Again, taking that deposit from the invoice marked paid and what's integrating from the bank account, and you match it into one transaction so that you only have one deposit showing on your reconciliation screen. Okay. Keeping your sales number accurate. All right, so we're gonna hit match. Now, the other deposit we were playing with was this one, the 4450. Okay, so this is where the error happens. This isn't prompting you to match, right? So if you didn't know that you create, you didn't pay attention to the fact that you create some invoices in QuickBooks, some you don't, yada, 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 right? And you just added this as sales. Well, you're going to show the two invoices marked as paid in your reconciliation screen, and you're going to show this deposit, which creates what? Duplicate income for $4,450. Okay. This is really easy to find when you look at your balance sheet because there's that account we talked about, undeposited funds, will have a dollar amount on it. It should be zero because when you take the paid invoice and you tie it to the transaction clearing the bank, it merges into one and zeros. So it deposits into undeposited funds and then takes it out of undeposited fund to put it in the bank account, which zeros that transaction. So if there's money sitting in undeposited funds, there's something wrong with what's been integrated. Okay. So I'm telling you that so that you know that that's a trigger. One of the things as accountants we look for when we're looking at financials. All right. So how would I match this? So you would click on this transaction because you know it's a deposit and you know we created a couple invoices to go with this. So instead of having it as categorized, we want to click match. And it will bring up a filter here. So it's going to show you the last 12 months basically of transactions. And then you could put based on deposits. Payments received is the one I always use because it's the one that populates your payments in here. Okay. Or you could show all, which would mean it would show open invoices too. Okay. And then you click and click. Okay. So here, two selected to equal the downloaded transaction. So the difference is zero. Perfection. Okay. This worked. All right. Well, what if you didn't get both of these? Okay. So example was one of the questions we had previous. What if I charge $1,000, so my payment is for $1,000, but I only get a little bit of it? Okay. So in that case, you would only select that you got this part of it. And then you see this little resolve button here. You would click this and it brings up down here for you to categorize appropriately. Okay. So for that question up here, you would show $1,000. Okay. Show $1,000 here, but your downloaded transaction would only be $970. Okay. So you have a $30 discrepancy. So down here, you could put in credit card fees or processing, bank fees. If you stick it in there, it doesn't matter to me. Okay. For simplicity purposes, let's just do bank fees because I know we have it. Okay. And then you would make it a negative number so that then transaction selected $1,000, transaction downloaded 970, and now you've got it would be 970. Obviously, it's showing this because it's a bigger transaction, but you would show it because you put a negative number here. And then this is categorizing a negative income number into your expense category. Okay, so it looks proper on your financials. Okay, same thing for you could do discounts and whatever else in here as well if you don't track them on the invoices. So that's how you use the resolve button. For training purposes today, these two match and we're going to hit match. Okay. And again, we go into our bank reconciliation screen. We resume our reconciliation. And you'll see that these two transactions are listed as individual deposits, but totaled out properly. And here's your other one. And again, no other duplicates in there. Okay. So it matched together. Now you're going to use match transactions for other things. The other item you're going to use match transactions on is like payments from your bank account to your credit card. In QuickBooks, they're considered transfers. Because you're transferring money between accounts inside of QuickBooks, even though you're really making a full payment on your bank account. Okay. So when you make the transfer from one to another, when the other, where you transferred the money from, sees that transaction hit their account, then they're going to match with what you had already transferred over. Okay, so that's another area of like kind of can be a pain. Okay, so for me in my industry, I move money from my operating account to my payroll account, and I move it all the time, right? So when I categorize in my bank transactions my payroll account, all the transfers for the income are coming from a different account, and so I put them here. I make sure to record them as a transfer, and I'll say for training purposes, we'll use our miles card. Okay, and then you add. And then when I go to the Spark miles card, the payment here should match based on the dollar amount you transferred, and it will prompt you to match. Okay, or it'll say credit card payment. Those are the other options it gives you sometimes. Okay. So let me do one. So on 2/28/24, we paid 1504.78. So again, for training purposes, I'm going to go in to the checking account and put in a manual transaction. And I'm going to call this a transfer. And I'm going to say that this happened on the 27th because it should be day 1504.78. And I'm going to say the Spark. Oops, make it spell Spark. And hit save. So I've entered it into the bank account. So let me go back to my transaction screen. Let me go back to my Spark card. And it's 15. And here you go. The transfer matched. Matches are the most unappreciated, unused, and confusing aspect of QuickBooks, because if it doesn't match, then you've got the duplicate. Okay. And then obviously, if you start realizing you have duplicates and you're deleting the duplicates, you're creating issues on the other side, where then your reconciliation might be off because you selected a different transaction than the one you're trying to delete, and so on and so on. Now let's take a minute and look at questions for matching, now that I've gone through a couple examples. And obviously, as you guys see, all these items I had to do matching are all things we've been talking about in the last two classes. Entering a manual transaction, categorizing a transaction, marking an invoice paid, creating an item, creating a customer, like all these things are things that we've been doing, okay? So go down to our questions here. So Richard said usually the duplicate entries are not obvious, which is correct. And QuickBooks won't highlight it as a match possibility. What is the best way to track down the duplicate items? Understanding what those items could be. So transfers, so payments on accounts, income, and then obviously checks or bills that you have paid or expenses you have already entered, would be the big way to find it. If you don't remember in that process and it doesn't prompt you for it, when you get into the reconciliation screen, you'll have a lot of entries that will show based on date or dollar amount and to the same vendor that you might find it, and then you could work it that way. Otherwise, I encourage you to do the reconciliation and then go back through and see what's still sitting in that bucket. And if what's sitting in that bucket is like you swiped your card at Chipotle, you know that probably should have already cleared and you could delete those items. So your reconciliation screen is your absolute end all check system, because there should be nothing but checks and accounts payable that are sitting in that bucket at the end of the year, basically. Or if somebody really didn't clear it. Richard, that's not a bad option too. We don't talk about journal entries till the next class. But journal entries tend not to be auditable. So, if you do that, just be prepared if you ever got audited to supply bank statements and things like that. But yes, it does work to eliminate matches. So David says, I like the resolve button that we talked about when making adjustments to payments and things like that. I've had problems where employees used mobile deposit and record the wrong amount, both more or less. I've been requesting my bank to debit or credit the error to reconcile correctly for small amounts. Is resolve not a proper for paychecks? You can use it for paychecks too. Yes, absolutely. Or if you wanted to in that item, we haven't talked about it yet, but splitting transactions, which we talked about in the next class, you have another option there too, David. Carol, when you moved everything from desktop to QuickBooks Online, there's a lot of duplicates. What's the best way to deal with these? I would say do the reconciliation to current, so August, and then you would just go in and delete those transactions that are duplicates. We haven't really talked about deleting stuff yet, but we will get into that here shortly. Kelly, yes, undeposited funds, that is an option. So when you receive a payment, and it tells you where over on this type side of the screen, here, I'll do it for you. So edit. So on this screen, which is your payment screen, payment method and where to deposit to. You want to make that undeposited funds so that it doesn't go into the checking account. Steve, if you only do manual entry in QuickBooks, there is no need to match. That is correct. Adam, yes, as with PayPal, it deposits into your bank account because PayPal is just like a holding account. Matching those transactions as transfers would be the correct way to do it so you don't have duplicate expenses and income. Carol, I did say deleting could cause an issue if you had reconciled it on a previous count and it was a transfer. But because it's an issue from the data coming in from desktop, you probably wouldn't have any issues. So it says, I have members, subscribers in my business who purchase supplies for the business. If I link the member's credit card, can QBO auto charge their credit card? It won't auto charge their credit card unless they're paying for the subscription. If you mean when they go and use their card, if it would bring the data into QuickBooks, that is correct, as long as it's integrated. Christy, no, if it says confirm, that's okay too. It shouldn't create a duplicate transaction. Okay, perfect. So take a break from the questions. Again, any questions I haven't answered, guys, we'll try to get to before the end. But we have a couple more things we want to talk about. So I want to talk about customer and vendor management. Okay. So why is it important to manage our customers and vendors? So a vendor is anybody that we are paying money to. It could be a Walmart, an Office Max, a Staples, a Chipotle, It could be a multiplier, it could be a tax software, it could be a subcontractor that we paid for marketing services, the list goes on. Okay. So we want to keep our vendors current so that our list doesn't get overpopulated. Okay. Now, that being said, I don't review my vendors very often. My vendors change constantly. But for the ones that I buy majority of my things through, it's the same thing. So my vendors tend to be that I am a character of habit. I go to the same 5 gas stations, the same 5 stores, the same 5 suppliers. Amazon would be probably my number one for paper, ink, and so on. I go to Best Buy for computer equipment if I need it, or TVs or any stereos, any of that stuff in my office. Office Max or Office Supplies was my place for chairs and things like that for my office. So majority of my vendors are pretty generic, right? Um, for you guys, it would be like the big suppliers you would be using. So if you're in construction, you might have a Baird Brothers, a Banner Supply. If you're in bus repair, you could have Cardinal Bus, panel control. If you're in garage doors, it might be CHI. You know what I mean? Like it just depends. Like you would have big suppliers. Okay. So your suppliers are going to be your vendors, and those are going to be the ones you want to keep up to date. You want to make sure their addresses are accurate, because if you're printing checks and you mail a check to the wrong address, best example of this one right now is Dominion just became Enbridge Gas in Ohio. So for those of you that are Ohioans, you had to put in a new vendor name, but it was replacing a vendor you would have already used, and the address was different. Sometimes people move offices, so you want to make sure that you're kind of spot checking those at least once a year to know that their addresses are updated. Again, so if you need to communicate with them, you have updated information, checks aren't coming back to you in the mail, and so on. Okay. So our vendors sit under expenses because these are people we're paying. So here's our vendors. Now, every time we categorize a transaction, it's going to create a vendor. So you can see that we got lots of vendors already just from the little bit of categorization we've done. Okay. Can a vendor be a customer? Yes. They just cannot have the exact same name, meaning you have to put a period or an initial or a little special emojicon at the end, something. They just can't be the same. Okay. So from here, you can do a couple things. You can import vendors. So if you're moving or opening another company, but you're going to use the same suppliers, you can enter that and import it. It's an Excel file, obviously. Okay. Or you could just do it one at a time. And again, you have all this information you can fill out for them. Okay. Well, what if you've already got the vendor in here? So say we're not gonna interact with Ann Sharp anymore. Okay, so I opened her up, and I'm gonna hit edit, and I can adjust any of this information I want. And again, this will jump you through the screens, your little widget up here, instead of scrolling down. That's a preference to you guys. Okay, but we don't want to mess with her anymore. So we want to say make inactive. Boom. Now it says I'm deleted. Okay. So now if I go back to vendors, I do not populate in this list unless you ask me to populate in this list. So if you come back to a vendor later, you can reactivate them and you still have their history. Okay. You also saw, like, if I go to Apple, there's a merge. So like if QuickBooks didn't say you had an account, but you actually have an account, so now you have 2 Apple accounts, boom, you can merge them together. Or Dominion and Enbridge, you can merge them together. Okay. And again, you can see your vendor detail down here if you've got it filled out. Okay. Customers are going to be even more important to manage. So customers are going to be under our sales module because they are for sales, right? We only have 3 customers, and as you can see, some of them have more detail than others. Again, you can import a customer list. So if you think you're going to use the same customers, or you've decided that you want to start fresh and not bring bad habits into new software, you can do that. and import that way. You can obviously just click new and type in the information. You can do it also from the invoice screen, which you've seen us do today. And then down here, again, you have a lot of options. You can make them inactive. You can create things for them. Okay. If you click on them, you can edit it, update address information. Again, your module up here, same type of thing. It toggles all the way through. You don't want to scroll, you'll see their history. Okay. And you can see quick links to things. Okay. And you can make me inactive from here. And again, then she's going to say delete it. Okay. And then you have a make active button to bring it back. Okay. Customers are probably going to be more important to keep updated than vendors. Vendors are important so you don't have to scroll through 1,000 different Chipotle's and Wendy's because it keeps creating the same one over and over again. The customers, when you go to do a mailing at the end of the year, because you can actually port out a customer list in here and create it into labels, if you don't have proper addresses, proper spelling of names, that type of thing, it can be a problem. If you try to call customers and again are using QuickBooks to house all that information, make sure that's updated. Invoices are important to keep updated so that you can actually send the invoices directly to their email. If you want to mail them, again, that's fine, print them and mail them, but again, you have to have the proper address there too. So it's really important to kind of manage that. And you don't want to send a mailing to a customer that didn't pay you to put yourself top of mind for them when they didn't take care of their first invoice. So until they take care of that, why would we want to put ourselves in front of them to do more work? Okay, so just some options for you. But obviously keeping these up to date is a big deal. Okay. And then we talked about items. Okay, so say you work in a field where cost fluctuates constantly on items, or your labor costs, all that kind of stuff fluctuates. So I'm going to create a new item here. I'm going to say it's a non-inventory part instead of a service. Okay, and we're going to say this is for mulch. And we're going to say mulch in the description. And the price for mulch is 24 per yard. Okay. And then I want this to be service income for now. We're going to hit save and close. Okay. Well, say my mulch went up. It's not 24 now. Now it's 34. That is only going to change the new invoices. It is not going to change previous invoices. Okay. I want to repeat that. When you edit an item in your invoice section, things that are going on your invoice for billing, it's not going to edit past items, only going to edit future items. Okay. Now, why do I say that twice? I say that twice because if you realize that these are mapped into the wrong bucket, meaning training income isn't going into training income, it's going into something else. If you go in and change it, QuickBooks Online does not undo all the things that were marked paid that are in the wrong bucket. It will just only correct it moving forward. Where QuickBooks Desktop, if you change an item, it will change everything for that item history-wise. Not dollar amount, but change the buckets. QuickBooks Online does not do that. So when we look at your reports and see things in the wrong bucket, we can fix it moving forward. And then a journal entry, which we'll talk about next class, would be used to change the history. So that's why it's important. And we talk about reports in the first class because they really tell us where things are and are not going in our favor, whether they're in the right bucket or not. Okay. But again, you can hit edit, you can make inactive, you can't delete, you can duplicate something if you need more than one, meaning that you want to sell L-shaped piping as a plumber, but you have a 3/4 L shape, a 1 inch, a 1/2 inch, and whatever else. So you could duplicate it and save yourself some of the typing. And then you can always run reports for these service items. Okay. Again, you can import if you wanted. And then as you can see, inventory is not eligible at this package we have now. And you can always run a report to see these. So like if people are like, oh, what do you got into your things? And you can show them and show pricing. So it's like a generic review of everything. Okay. All right, let me jump back into the questions here. Reminder, obviously put all your questions in the Q&A section. Ida, we talk about reoccurring templates on the next class. So if you want to hold that question till next week. Bill, you do not need a W-9 from every vendor. You need W-9s from vendors that specifically are required to get 1099s at the end of the year. So this would be sole proprietorships, locally owned, which again, you're not going to go into a gas station and get a W-9. LLC businesses is usually the way we tell it. And anybody you pay more than $600 to, there's a threshold there too. So Ava said in sales, I have different types of charges, 24-hour service, call standby and on-site training and a service visit. How do I add these? I would add all of those as individual items. So under sales, go to products and services and then create new and then to do 24-hour service as one item and then put if there's a fixed cost associated with it, start there. And then on-site training and then a service visit, you know, those would all three be individual items or products and services. James says, if I always bill and receive payments, is it better to just delete any match? James, do you mean delete the stuff coming in from the bank account that would be a deposit? Same thing for above. How do I match payments that are made through PayPal? I already have the invoice. So mark the invoice paid, and then in your PayPal account, which should be shown under your transaction screen, when you have a transaction down here, you click on it and click match. And then what those payments should populate here. And then obviously you lost a PayPal fee. So you should have to use your resolve button. James, you could do that. That would be fine if you wanted to do that instead of matching. So Eric says, I reconciled my credit card and didn't delete the duplicates because I didn't see that option. Do I need to go back and delete those now? The answer is yes. So Eric, if you go into your reconciliation screen, and you'll see your list of quote unquote duplicates, right? If you click on one of them and click edit, you can click more and then delete. Kenzie says, what if I just exclude the doubles of things that came over from desktop to online that are all doubles and I cannot match? No option to do so. You could just exclude those, absolutely. That would probably be about the time you use the exclusion tool the most is when you're first getting integrated and your transfer is done. Karen, yes, if you are aware that is a duplicate in the for review screen, you can exclude it, yes. So how do you handle a transfer? We kind of talked about that. from one account. You will find the transaction in which you're transferring, and you will click on it. Instead of categorizing it, you want to mark it as a transfer. This automatically prompted it to go to the bank account because it's the only other account I have in QuickBooks. But if you have more than just that account, and then you would click add. And then on the other side, it should tie through. If it doesn't force a match on the other account that you're transferring the money to, then when you get in, you will have to exclude the deposit for the same dollar amount or try to get it to match by, again, opening the transaction and clicking match to try to get that match to come through. Tracy says, if I have never reconciled, which by the way, this is very common, and I started QuickBooks in 2020, what should I do now to get reconciled? So Tracy, I would reconcile, do a mass reconciliation, meaning take 2020 from the first day of 2020 through the last day of 2023, assuming you've already filed taxes, and mass reconcile it, meaning I would take the ending balance of 2023, 12/31, and put it in, put that date, and then select all. And then if you cut checks, look at the last few checks that would be in December that could have floated into January of 2024. And then obviously, fingers crossed it matches to the penny. If it doesn't, you would have to enter an adjustment that I would backdate into the previous year and do a journal entry to reverse out for tax purposes. Just follow me there. We haven't talked about journal entries. But you would enter the adjustment to get the reconciliation to date so you could do it properly moving forward. So it says, how can you track pending grant payments to an organization? And also, what can you do once it deposits, and how would you go about this? This is a great question. So obviously this is targeted kind of maybe towards more nonprofit. I've had it where nonprofits have used customers to track the grants, but some grants should be on the balance sheet, and then obviously you're categorizing against them as you're doing draws on them. So if you have a $10,000 grant, but you only got 5,000 up front, 5,000 would show on the P&L, 5,000 would be on the balance sheet, and then obviously as you spent that 5,000 appropriately, you're tagging expenses against it. You could also use grants as classifications. There's a couple options there. Yes, if your CPA does a journal entry at year end, that's probably to tie out what's in QuickBooks to your tax return. So maybe you could just start reconciling this year, but you're still going to have to select all those back transactions, which is why I told you to do it in 2 pieces. It says, if I see a pulp transaction that is for personal use and not an employee, can you still record it as meals and entertainment? If it was personal use, but you were doing work while you were at pulp, then yes. If it is personal use, you were not on your phone, you did not help anybody work-wise, then no, and it would go in owner's draw. So it says, I have deleted items crowding my reconciliation from one account. How do I remove them? So with QuickBooks Online, when you delete a transaction that was downloaded, it goes from being categorized, which is what you see in the reconciliation screen, back to the for review. And you would then take the transaction in the for review and select it and exclude it so that you don't recategorize it again. Okay. If you're deleting something that was manually entered, it will not come back in this screen and it will be deleted and gone. Okay. If you are deleting an item from QuickBooks Desktop, it should be gone. It should not populate back in the screen. It's only if it's a transaction that was done in the integration. When you delete it, it pops back to the for review and you have to exclude it. Okay. All right. So guys, I want to go over, we have finished everything on our task list. I want to spend a few minutes just to give you guys my contact information and review what we're going to talk about in the next class. And then we'll continue to answer any questions with the remaining time, because obviously I see we still have some. So first off, here's my contact information. Uh, let's see here, slideshow, Zoom. Okay, so here's my contact information. That's my direct email, my direct phone number. You could text or call. And then my website is actually under construction, so be warned if you go to it and it doesn't load, it's because I actually met with my marketer yesterday. But feel free to reach out for more individualized stuff. If you think you need additional training, I'm happy to help. If you have some additional items or housekeeping things that you want to just bounce ideas off of, feel free. And then obviously, if you have any issues with getting PowerPoints or anything like that at the end from Gwen, I'm happy to help. And obviously you guys have everybody at Canton Score that can help as well. But I do want to make sure you guys have my contact information in case you need anything. And then I am going to bring that back in just a second. I want to open up and show you guys what's on the agenda for the last training session. So we have 2 more training sessions. One is the expert of just QuickBooks Online. And then the last training session is specialized for nonprofits. So keep that in mind. Obviously, you're always welcome, but the nonprofit portal does have some more customization features for them with names and the way that things are done. So next time we're going to talk about project costing, editing transactions and accounts, sub accounts. We're going to get into contractors, very basic payroll, not very much of it. Voiding versus deleting, budgeting. There's some miscellaneous tools we get into. We talk about reoccurring transactions and how to stop them, journal entries, receipts, and then sales tax. Those are our big things that we're going to talk about next. So I'm going to put my contact information back up on the screen, and then I will also continue answering some questions here with the last few minutes we have. So feel free to keep putting questions in the Q&A. Again, questions go in Q&A. I haven't really been looking at the chat very much, but I'm happy to look at it once we're done with the Q&A section, okay? So let's see here what we got. Yes, we will covering budgeting last time or next time, Carol. Steve, are you talking about the T-sheets that QuickBooks does? Joanne, yes, you can still sign up for the next session. I don't have any training on it. As of right now, we don't teach it in the session. But I am currently figuring it out myself, I would say, in the lack of better words, because I actually have a client that uses it now. So if you want to reach out to me individually, I can maybe try to help you with a few things. So it says, how do we know if undeposited funds are reconciled in our account? So the undeposited funds will be what you do to match the deposits hitting the bank account. And so as long as your deposits are being matched in your bank account to payments being made, which is what's going into undeposited funds, it will be matched. But obviously the undeposited funds should have a zero balance, or it would have whatever an invoice was on the last day of the month that deposited the next day. But for the most part, it should be zeroed, and that's how you would know it was reconciled. So journal entries are not auditable. What does that mean? So if an IRS auditor comes in and audits you, meaning they question your business numbers or an area of your business, they don't want to see journal entries. They're going to want bank statements and receipts. They would prefer that because you can't reconcile a journal entry, meaning that a journal entry can be used to mass enter transactions instead of individually entering all of those transactions. So if you had a bank credit card and you decide to do a journal entry to enter all the expenses, instead of putting in vendor of Sam's Club and categorizing it to office expense, you just have office expense. And then you have a total number there, and it could be 5 or 6 transactions off of your credit card in that lump total instead of the individual charges you see when you do the ledger. So that's what I mean by not auditable, meaning then they're going to want bank statements, credit card statements, and receipts right away, versus if you integrate QuickBooks or manually enter everything into QuickBooks Online line by line, then you're checking everything off. It's a preference. It's not the end of the world. If you use journal entries, that's a preference. I tell people to use journal entries with CPAs at the end of the year for entries or major things that need to be corrected, or initial purchases, initial investments, at big asset purchases, limit the usage of them basically. Does it matter who bought the product versus who paid the invoice, especially for tax purposes? You're playing in a gray area. Who bought the product should be the same as who's paying for it. If somebody is trying to use somebody else's tax exempt, that's kind of a gray area of a no-no. That's more about what you're comfortable with. But I think at the end of the day, it matters based on who paid for it, not who took the product home. Christy, we don't go into detail on how to balance loans, but we will talk about splitting transactions next class, and that will really help with that. So Michelle says, what happens if you have 2 checking accounts and one was closed, but they're still showing a balance on QuickBooks Online? How do you correct that? When you closed that checking account, did you move the money into the new account? And if so, how did you categorize that initial deposit in the new account? Because it should have been a transfer from the old account to zero that account out to tie to the deposit of the new account. Stephanie, I think we answered this. This might go along with the matching conversation, but I have deposits from multiple companies, so I'm pretty sure we answered that. If you have that question again, let me know. Does it matter for vendors, gas stations, restaurants that you keep the vendor's specific name accurate? I've been thinking about doing generic gas station restaurants. That is totally up to you. Again, there's no right or wrong or indifferent. It's going to show you the specific vendor on the memo line in the detail. So that's a preference up to you. You could do a bill to versus a ship to. That would keep the records of the transactions when you have sometimes the payee is not the same as the product receiver. That would really probably help you. Tracy, the nonprofit training is the last Thursday of September. I think that date is
September 26th.
26th. Thank you. Eric, the previous sessions recording and slides are available if you were in attendance. If not, you can reach out to Gwen and see if she can make an exception for you. How do you post a deposited check on an invoice that you won't get for several months? Kelly, can you give me some more detail? So you're creating an invoice for a check you already received, but you're not going to create the invoice for several months? Gloria, Gwen will send an email with her contact information when she sends out the video and PowerPoint. Let's see here. You said in the end of day, the payee matters instead of who receives the product. Payees. So it says that in the end of the day, the payee matters of who's receiving the product. So if you have somebody buying the product and then you're shipping it to somebody else, which happens, you ship product as a construction person to a location, but you are the person buying the product, they get your tax exempt. I would say maybe apply that same concept to what you're doing. Again, on your invoice, create purchasing, the person paying for it should be the one that's tax exempt, and they're shipping it to somebody else, but you keep record of who they're shipping it to. And as long as the person who's tax exempt can back up, justify, and clear the fact that the person receiving it was authorized to be purchased under them, you would be okay.
Okay, I'm here. Hello.
And
Yes.
I turned on the, I turned on the sound for 3 people who have
Okay, no
raised
problem.
their hands.
Okay. So who is the first one that wants to talk? I don't see who raised their hands. Sorry, guys. But
It's Kelly, Bill,
Okay.
and Kat have raised their
Okay.
hands.
Okay, so Kelly, let's start with you because I was actually just getting ready to read your question.
Okay, my question was, how do I post a deposit on an invoice I don't receive for several months? My company will order a large amount of framing material in advance to hold that line. So we send a check for 10,000, but we won't have an invoice to apply to that check for a month or two. But I have to post the check in the month that I write it.
So you would just apply it to the vendor as like a purchase order.
It's
And
called a
then we would
purchase
flip.
order.
Yep. And then we don't have purchase orders in the QuickBooks subscription we're in.
Oh,
It's in the $90 one. They get you there. Um,
okay.
you know what, Kelly? If you would send me an email personally, let me think
Okay.
if I can find a workaround for you without the purchase orders.
Okay.
Because I don't want to have to make you pay $90 for that like rare event, obviously.
No,
like,
and my QuickBooks doesn't look like what you've been using, so I must have a different version.
okay, and we could take a look at that too.
So I'll send you an email or a call and we'll go from there. Thanks.
Perfect. Sounds good, Kelly. All right, who wants to go next?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, it's Kat.
Hi, Kat.
Hey there. I'm kind of in the same boat with the lady. QuickBooks does not match the same what you're sharing, and just because I'm such an amateur at this, a lot. I won't say a lot. All of it's over my head. So
Okay.
I just hope to be able to reach out with someone. I don't know if there's one-on-one sessions that I can do, but I need to start at the basics.
Well, Kat, why don't you contact me directly, phone number or emails on the screen, obviously, and let's take a peek at what you have. I have a feeling that you guys might be in the self-employed version of QuickBooks, which would be why it looks different, which is okay. Obviously, I just am teaching a little bit more advanced than that version of QuickBooks, which is why stuff looks
Right.
different. But we
course.
could absolutely set up some one-on-one training if you would like. I've done that in the past with people from the videos and stuff here. But reach out to me so we can jump on like our own personal call and kind of dive in a little bit deeper on what your needs are, what you're trying to figure out, and we can go from there.
Thank you so much.
And then I think we had one more that raised their hands. I believe Gwen just dropped in the chat. Gwen, can you drop in the chat a link to register for the next session? I've got somebody asking for it in the Q&A.
And I can, but when oh my goodness, this thing is too loud. I can, but when I send out the slides, I will, and the recording, I will also have a link to the registration.
Okay, perfect. That works then.
Yeah.
That way we got that. So that's great. Do we have any other questions? I think the only question I had left outstanding was a question for Michelle. I don't know if Michelle's still on the call. And guys, I'm just scrolling through the chat. Appreciate all the positive feedback. I really enjoy running these training sessions with Canton Score. Perfect. I think we have answered all the questions. Then Gwen, I think we are about done.
Well,
Just
Ann,
as to
this is
reiterate.
Yeah, Ann, this is John. Thank you so much for the webinar today. You did an excellent job. And
Thank you.
just as a reminder, next Thursday, there'll be QuickBooks for experts, and then the following week on the 26th will be QuickBooks Online for nonprofits. And there's a requirement to sign up for each of the QuickBooks independently. So if you want to not attend next week's, that's okay. Just don't sign up. If you want to sign up for nonprofits, you can just sign up for that one as well. Also, Gwen did put out a link to see the webinar, and she'll also email the link to everyone that attended. If you want to see past webinars, you can go to www.score.org/Canton, and there's a drop-down tab for pre-recorded webinars, and you can view all the webinars that are out there, including the one from last week is posted out there. So with that, Ann, I really appreciate it again, and hope to see a lot of people next week on the 19th.
Perfect. Sounds good, guys. It's 12 o'clock on the dot. Look at us being on time. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Ann. Bye-bye.